sometimes an article does not give us all the answers that we want. So that's when we thought that we should come up with a series on energy, on various topics that are related to energy, so that we get a full-rounded view on what is the current problem and what we should focus on, what are the solutions, what is the current policy. So with this in mind, last week we had an initial introductory talk on energy crisis or the energy challenges today, and what is the way forward kind of thing. So that there was a lot of interest from a lot of people who participated. There was a good debate, especially around on the fact, even after the talk, last time we had this huge debate about whether a private ownership is good or is it actually the problem. Because current gas problem, they say it's because of the a corporate owning it. Whether that is the problem or is there something else at the policy or regulation level itself, there is a problem. So this is a debate that is important, and I'm sure that all of us have taken some side or the other internally. But what I would urge everyone here is to listen to the talk today with an open mind and see if it helps us understand the topic better. So today we have Dr. Usha Ramachandra. She's a professor at Administrative Staff College, and she's the area chairperson for the energy area. She has a really extensive knowledge and background in working in the area of energy. She is so her areas of interest are mainly policy, regulation, and restructuring the infrastructure sector, especially energy sector. She has worked with various countries in South Asia in terms of framing their energy policy as well, and she's worked with a lot of government agencies, the regulatory bodies at central and state level in terms of tariff planning, tariff analysis, and a host of issues related to policy. So we have a very eminent speaker today. I hope all of you will enjoy the session and make the best use of the session. Dr. Umar.
Thank you. Stand up. Okay. It's just for my. I don't need to read it. I mean,
do you want?
No, I think this is fine. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes.
May I just announce? It would be great if we can put the cell phones in silent mode, including myself.
That's what I did in my. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Suman. It's a real honor to be here, and I'm so glad that you didn't call me an expert. I feel really embarrassed, because if this is one area where one is always learning, there is so much happening, there is so little that one knows at the end of the day, that it makes me so embarrassed to be called an expert. And despite so many years of being in this sector, it continues to frustrate, because there are so many issues that one needs to deal with, and you try, and then at the end of the day, there's still so many problems. So in that sense, I'm really glad for your introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm glad to be here on several counts. In fact, first, of course, to be talking to be interacting with people I don't know at all. In my profession, very often we know who they are, we know which companies they come from, we know which side of the debate that they are at. Here I am in the middle of people that I don't know at all. So that is a kind of a challenge. And secondly, I'm very happy to be here at Lamakan. Because I knew Mr. Hassan, who lived here, and of course, for a long time I never met him. He and my aunt were I think they had two tables. They shared an office space in RR Labs where he worked. He taught her Urdu, and when I had a problem with my camera, well, she took me to him. And he taught me how to fix the camera, and he also taught me what I should look at when I took photographs. It's a special tribute to him as well that I'm here after so many years of having known him. So this morning, what I'd like to do is, I don't have a PPT. I thought I should not have a PPT. In fact, I would just like to talk about issues in governance, issues in regulation. As far as energy is concerned, you may find my talk a little more focused on electricity, because I know electricity more than I know the other two, the other areas of energy. But then I will try to give a much more holistic view of the entire situation. Now, all of you know what we mean by governance. A governance is an attempt to bring in decision making in a particular area, in a particular sector, to be made in a transparent manner, to be made in an accountable manner, and more than either, and what is really at the foundation of both accountability and transparency, is capacity. The capacity for all stakeholders who are involved in a particular sector to find an area where they can actually intervene and make their voices heard. This is the fundamental foundation of a governance structure of any, whether you're talking about governance at a larger level or governance at a sectoral level. And here we're really talking about a sectoral level. And trying to bring in a regulatory framework that we have in the country today in the electricity, in the energy sector, was a very important part of the initiative to bring in appropriate governance structures. So the regulatory framework we have, and we'll talk a little bit about what regulation is and what a regulatory framework that we have today is. Like I said, I don't know any of you, so I don't even know, what you may know or what you may not know, and there is no kind of a benchmark from which I can start assuming that everybody would know a certain thing. So if you find that I'm talking about something all of you know, just be patient, and if you think that if you have a question, please feel free to ask.
So you can assume we know nothing.
Okay. So the idea was to bring in a regulatory framework. I'll talk about electricity because that is the one that has the most quote-unquote advanced regulatory framework, and then we'll go into coal and natural gas and petroleum a little later on. So, so the attempt was to bring in a regulatory framework for the sector that would help better governance, that would help good governance in the sector. Now, even today, and as the case was in 1991, when the first initiatives were taken to open up the sector, as it were, the sector is significantly controlled and owned by the government, through the central government, through the state governments. Now, electricity is one energy sector which is on what we call the concurrent list of the Constitution. So it is under both state and central. Whereas if you look at coal, when you look at natural gas and petroleum, they're all under the central sector. But electricity, and within electricity, distribution of electricity, where we do have the maximum of problems that deal with non-transparency, lack of accountability and so on, is entirely within the ambit of the state governments. So, and this was the situation in the early 90s, and it by and large continues to be the situation today. Though we do have some private sector involvement, it's not huge. It might be significant because a lot of media attention goes to the private sector involvement, but in terms of, it's a significant government presence. Now, a little bit of the history. In 1991, the generation part, you see, we as a country have always been supply oriented. We think that once we have enough supply, everything else takes care of itself. So our planning process, right from the first 5-year plan onwards, has always been chasing supply. The more installed capacity we have, the more we generate, and then we need to use coal because we have mostly coal. The more we generate, everything sorts itself out. And so and as an aside, what was the situation is that even today we are on the brink of the 12th five-year plan. In all the 11th five-year plans so far, we have never been able to reach our targets. Now, how those targets are set is another story. And why is it that we only achieve 40–50% of those targets is yet another story. And why is it that we don't do a post-mortem every time is another story. So these all have to do with the policy part of it. So we've never reached those targets, but we continue to chase supply. We have more and more generation, larger plants, use up all our fossil fuels, and then things will be fine. So in 1991, the sector was opened up, and they said, invited this, and the exact paragraph for the amendment said that since we do not have money to invest in generation capacity, we will open up to the private sector. So it was opened up, and then all of you are very young, many of you are, so you perhaps don't remember, but there was a flood of interest from all over the world. They wanted to come here, set up plants and so on and so forth. Huge, Enron was there, Cogentrix, of course the first IPP was set up by GVK Reddy in Andhra Pradesh. So there was a flurry of interest, and it all died down very quickly. And it was not at all strange that it died down very quickly, because we said that yes, you set up the plant, but you can only sell it to the State Electricity Board. And the State Electricity Board was bankrupt. So if a private player goes up to a bank and says, I need to invest 2,000 crores in a project, a power project, I have only one customer and that customer is bankrupt, nobody's going to look at that plant with any kind of interest. So the government of India, those notorious sovereign guarantees that the government of India said, saying that we will provide the comfort for the bankers to actually lend to these projects. They signed 8, and it was brought to their notice that if those sovereign guarantees were actualized, then the entire country's credit rating would be downgraded. So it went through a huge turmoil, the entire sector. And decision making was one of the things that needed to be tackled. Decision making not only for investments, but also decision making for the tariff component. How do you price your electricity? We don't know. It was just done in files. The State Electricity Board chairman would go and tell the chief minister or the energy secretary, saying that we need to pay our coal suppliers, we need to pay our employers, we need 500 crores. The government would say, I don't have 500 crores, I'll give you 300, you do what you can. So that was the kind of decision making. And depending on that, depending on whether, we always have elections, right? We have municipal elections, we have assembly elections, we have Lok Sabha elections. So no time was opportune to actually revise these tariffs in an appropriate fashion. So looking at all this in mind, the idea was, let us bring in a regulatory structure, let us change the regulatory framework for the sector that makes decision making much more open, much more transparent. And let us also involve different stakeholders to come in and involve themselves in this process, because it impacts everybody. Energy is one thing that impacts livelihoods, it impacts entrepreneurship, it impacts the entire growth of the economy. So this was the idea that came about in the mid-1990s. It started out in Orissa, and to be fair and to confess, it was as part of the World Bank initiative. They said, if you want us to lend, we need the comfort that you're going to return our money. In order for us to have this for comfort, you need to put in place a regulatory framework that would take care of these governance issues. Started off in Orissa, and then it started going, many states took it up. It was important to do it, but how you did it was a different question. It was important to bring in transparency, important to bring in accountability, but how did you do it? How do you do it? That was a problem. And so state by state, until the 1998 Electricity Regulatory Commissions Act was enacted in Parliament, many states brought in a new regulatory framework for the electricity sector. It had to be a state level thing because it was on the concurrent list. And after 98, we also had a central regulator for interstate problems. You know, you have interstate connectivity of transmission lines, you have power plants that supply electricity to more than one state. So those things don't come under the jurisdiction of the state government. So obviously you needed a central regulator, you needed a state regulator. So Andhra Pradesh, I'll take examples from Andhra Pradesh because we live here. So Andhra Pradesh set up its state regulatory commission in the year 2000. Now what do we mean? What was this whole framework was about? The idea was we need to have an independently appointed people who would have the powers to make these decisions. Decisions regarding investments, decisions regarding tariffs, different tariffs, the tariffs for generation, tariffs for transmission, tariffs, the retail tariffs that you and I pay for electricity. So these decisions would be made by the regulatory commission. It would be separated from the government. So the government would be responsible for policy. It's a sovereign right of the government to be responsible for policy. And the Act also said that if a government policy had a financial implication for a utility, then they would have to compensate. Otherwise, that policy becomes null and void. To give you a small example, when the government of Andhra Pradesh says free electricity for farmers, it is a policy decision. You cannot deny. I mean, if the government wants free electricity for farmers, you can't say no, it's not free, it can't be free. It can be free, it's their decision. But it costs the utilities X crores to supply electricity to farmers. So the idea was, yes, the government would also have to budget an amount. It's a budgeted amount, not a subvention, not a money that's handed out through some other account in the budget. It's a budgeted amount for support to agriculture, for subsidies in the electricity sector, and that is handed out to the utilities based on what the regulatory commissions certify that this is actually the cost of having supplied electricity to the farm. So the separation, the entire framework, if you look at it, the idea was, let us separate policy. Government is responsible for policy. Regulators would be responsible for regulatory decisions, and the companies. Now, the utilities were formed as companies. Most of the utilities continued to be 100% owned by the government, so they were actually public corporations. They became corporatized in the jargon. So they became companies under the Companies Act. Whether or not they are 100% owned by the government is a different decision. So decision making within these organizations would become much more professionalized. You know, that was what we thought. And the regulators would make their decisions on all the, the various kinds of decisions that would be taken, and it would have to be participatory. In fact, both the law as well as what the regulators bring out in their regulations talk about stakeholders' participation, without which decisions can't be made. Now, how many of you have heard about the tariff process? Tariff setting process. Anyone have you seen notices in papers? Have you read about it in the newspaper? Very little, right? So, as opposed to how decisions were made regarding tariffs prior to setting up of a regulatory commission, post regulatory commission, there is a process that has to be followed. The utilities go to the regulatory commission, they go with what they call a tariff filing, saying based on our projections for the following year, based on our demand projections, based on how much we need to buy to supply to this demand, based on our costs, this is what we call the annual revenue requirement that we have, and based on which the regulatory commission makes its decision on tariffs. It is open. These filings are open to public view. They are put up on the website. You can read it in local offices. You can take a photocopy of it, but you need to pay for that 1 rupee per page photocopying costs. Otherwise, they're available on the website. And in fact, consumer groups of various kinds, civil society groups are expected to intervene in this process. Now, some states, they said it has to be on stamp paper. But this doesn't make sense. People don't, you know, a consumer like you and me, why would we want to go out, get a stamp paper to make a representation? So many of the states said, no, let it be, it can be a white paper representation. In some states, they were very particular. They said, no, you must have a written representation before you can come and talk to us orally. But in some states, they were a little open about it, because it is supposed to be a consultative process. And it is not a judicial process. It's what we call a quasi-judicial process. So if these decisions are appealed in the tribunal or in the Supreme Court, and many of the earlier decisions are appealed because there is somebody who gets hurt in the process, then of course, you know, it takes on a more of a judicial kind of a process. But in this stage, in fact, I remember two incidences which I think is very important. One time we were in Punjab and they were having this public hearing, and farmers were very agitated because the electricity rates were going up, and they were shouting outside. And the chairman said they hadn't sent a written representation, but they're very agitated about these proposals. And the chairman said, let a representative of the farmers come in and we'll meet them, we'll talk to them. We will find out what their concerns are. And there was another, in Karnataka I remember, there is, this happens all the time. Every time there is a very, very vocal, very participative group of farmers in Mandya district. And every time there is an issue like this, the commission is flooded with 20,000 identical photocopied representations with different signatures. And in Maharashtra, the civil society groups are so much on top of it that in fact they are called to policy level decision making bodies as well. So this, I think last week Mr. Sri Kumar, he works with Prayas, and Prayas is one group that has been extremely participative in these, because now there is a platform for participation. One needs to make use of that platform. And how do you make this, how do you make use of this platform has been a huge challenge, because number one, a lot of consumer groups don't have the resources, and you need to understand the nuances of these filing. You know, it's not a newspaper article. There is a lot of technical jargon. There are calculations that need to be made. You need to rope in people who perhaps have retired recently from service and try to see how you can actually do this process. So this is one way in which the regulatory framework started evolving in the sector. Now, just to go back a little bit to talk about the theoretical underpinnings of this regulatory framework. A regulator uses only what we call the tools of regulation, which is by and large carrot and stick. You incentivize good performance and you penalize poor performance, and you're supposed to monitor performance as well. Now the entire regulatory, the construct of regulation, infrastructure or independent regulation that we call, started out in the United States more than a century back, when you had private sector building up infrastructure under what we call natural monopolies. So if you build a railroad track from A to B, you don't have competing railroad tracks, right? You have one track, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector. And you should be able to do what we call non-discriminatory open access. That means anyone should be able to pay for using that track. Likewise a road, likewise a pipeline, likewise electricity, any network. You should be able to allow others to use it. Now if it's in the government sector, everything was government, nobody really minded because everything is government. How do you charge it? It's one arm of the government to another arm of the government. But when it started being constructed in the private sector, the worry was that they would abuse their monopoly power and extract the maximum they can from consumers. They would charge for their services the maximum they could. Charge what we call monopoly prices. So the idea was of having a regulatory commission in place in the United States was that you have a regulator who will do two things. One is set the price for it. Now if you set a price for it and the private fellow still wants to make a profit, right? It's a profit maximization mode that they have in mind. So they want to make a profit. So what would they do? If they wanted to quality, they would compromise on quality. So it was very important for regulatory commissions to both look at prices as well as quality. And by, when you had electricity companies, water companies, and much later cable companies, ports, airports, all this infrastructure in the private sector, the regulatory commission's powers was expanded to regulate both prices, quality, and so on of all these areas. But in the rest of the world, we didn't have what we call an independent regulator because we didn't need one. Government, as government entities, were supposed to be self-regulatory. They don't need understanding was you need independent regulators for private companies, but why do you need it for public companies, public sector companies? You don't need it. They are self-regulatory and they don't have a profit motive in mind. They're supposed to have an underpinning of what is called a fair price. But a lot of things changed in the 1990s. In Europe, in Europe, particularly England and South America, the idea was let the governments get out of business and let private sector take over businesses. And if it can be in the private sector, why does the government have to do it? So they started selling off, power companies, gas companies, and a whole lot of infrastructure companies to the private sector. And parallelly, they set up an independent regulator to do what these American regulators were doing: prices, quality, monitoring of markets, and so on and so forth. Now, when we come to South Asia, we weren't really interested. We looked at private sector participation, but wholesale sale of assets, not yet. We're not interested in that. But we came to an understanding that not only do private companies abuse their monopoly powers, given the chance to do so, government companies can also abuse their monopoly powers. And how do they do that? Any idea? They don't price high. Our railway fares are probably one of the cheapest in the world. But how do they compromise? Quality, access issues. People will not have access to that service or quality of service. So by actually not getting the revenues that they require to continue to be in business, in the short run they gain because consumers are happy, they have cheap cheap infrastructure, cheap electricity, cheap LPG and so on. But in the long run, you're not able to invest in the sector. And you are compromising long-term interest with short-term gains. So it is not just private companies, but even the government companies can actually abuse their monopoly power through quality issues, access issues, and the pricing mechanism that can actually be harmful in the long term while looking at short-term gains. So the idea in India and South Asia was, let us bring in that regulatory framework. We will have a participative, we will have a much more stakeholder involvement in decision making and so on and so forth, but we will do it for a government-owned company. So it is an experiment we are doing. Whereas when you're regulating a private company, the minute the private company is penalized by the regulator, the shareholders get affected. Private shareholders get affected. The minute the private shareholders get affected, the management is in trouble. They probably move the management as well, right? So there is a mechanism by which penalties and incentives work in the private sector because it affects private interests. Whereas in the government sector, we have a regulatory framework which we have adopted. We use incentives, we use penalties, but they're all government companies. So the same impact is not felt on shareholders, because it's the government who's the shareholder. The government is the owner. The government, in a sense, is also the manager. And if a company gets penalized, well, who pays the penalty? Certainly not the employees. The employees continue to get their wages. They continue to get 4 yearly revision of wages. The MD comes and goes. He may be from the bureaucracy. He may be from a technical person. He doesn't have the accountability. He's looking for the next position. So nobody is held accountable in these companies. At the same time, we're using a regulatory framework that we've borrowed. So what I would say is, it's perhaps not the first best solution, but it's definitely better than not having a regulator at all. Rather than having no regulation, some regulation is better. But we still haven't found what we can construe to be the best solution because of some of these constraints, which is clearly coming out.
What they say, level playing field.
Yes.
The way you're regulating the private company,
you're regulating the public companies as well. And when we speak to groups, consumer groups who have been involved in the process, they say, yes, we are not happy with some of the decisions, but we know how they made those decisions. And we were happy that our views were heard. So it's not a black box out of which decisions are being made. But whether you agree with the decision or not, you have an area with which to participate. And if you keep trying and if you keep persisting, your voice might be heard. That is the situation that we have on the ground at the moment. So this is the regulatory framework that we have set up in the electricity sector, which continues today. Now, after the 1998 Electricity Act, Electricity Regulatory Commissions Act, it was optional for states to set up a regulatory commission. It was not mandatory. Some financial institutions would twist their arm and say, look, we won't lend if you don't set up a commission. But otherwise, legally, there was no mandatory requirement. After the 2003 Electricity Act, it was mandatory for all states to have a regulatory commission. So this is the same, we have the same kind of regulators across the states everywhere. Now, what is the position today? There are several areas that require serious attention. We have in economics what we call the theory of, I'll go back and forth between theory and, I don't think one should look at this with an empty box as far as theory is concerned. And theory somehow in the place where I work is a bad word. Oh, it's all theoretical. But without that, what are you talking about? You need the theory to be able to talk practice. But somehow if practitioners sort of have a very low opinion of theory, but without theory, there isn't anything. That's the beginning of thought in any subject at all. Now, coming back to regulation, we have two basic theories of regulation in economics. One is what we call the public interest theory, and the second is what we call the regulatory capture theory. So public interest theory is, yes, regulation is good, it looks at public interest, decision making is for the public interest, and so on and so forth. So the entire structure is built on that. But more often than not, what does happen in practice is what we call regulatory capture. Now this regulatory capture can happen before the decision is made or after this decision. Most of the time before the decision. And what we mean by regulatory capture is when one interest group can influence regulatory decision making in such a manner, then that group actually benefits. What we call vested interests, right? So what we have is what we call commercial capture of regulatory commissions, where the regulated entities, the utilities that the regulatory commission is actually regulating, influences the regulators so much that they make decisions in favor of those companies. And we also have what we call political capture, where political parties can influence decision making here. And in India, we also have what we call perhaps bureaucratic capture of regulatory commissions. If you look at the 29 commissions that we have in India today, almost all of them are chaired by retired civil servants. retired IAS. So it looks to be a post-retirement job, post-retirement benefit to be doled out to civil servants who comply with the government. Now, if you look at the composition of the Regulatory Commission, you find that not only are they chaired by retired civil IAS, not just civil service, but many of the finance members are from the civil service, and many of the technical members are also from some government department or the other, or they come in from the utilities that they are regulating. So you already find the influences coming in. The only saving grace is that decisions have to be made. These are decisions where you need to publish the methodology that you've used. You need to publish the data that you have used. You need to publish how you arrived at a certain decision by weighing up the different stakeholders. So that is a saving grace because of the openness or the transparency of the process. To some extent, who actually is in charge is less of an impact. But nevertheless, it's extremely unfortunate that they have been completely captured by the bureaucracy and indirectly by the government. You see, the very government owns the utilities and the regulatory commissions are being captured by the government. So decision making, unless what I call the Session effect comes into play, you leave the government and suddenly you find that you have a lot of powers to do things and you use those powers. Or you get into a regulatory commission and think, okay, I have a cushy post-retirement job for 5 years. Nobody they cannot even be impeached. Nobody can remove me unless they prove that I'm insane. So I'm there for 5 years and there's no reappointment. So thank God. If there was a reappointment, then we'll find all kinds of ridiculous kind of decisions coming in. So this is one of the problems, the kind of capture of the regulatory commissions that we are seeing in India today. In fact, when the Act was being discussed, when the Act was being framed, the American regulators said, why are you putting in at least 20 years of experience? And we said, look, if we don't put in 20 years of experience or adequate experiences in certain areas, we'll find all kinds of political, people who don't know anything coming into the sector. So we put in, in the section we said you must have more than 20 years experience in law, in administration, in management, in XYZ economics and so on. But we've still ended up in a place where we have a situation, nobody wants to be a regulator. I mean, it's been captured by a regulatory, by the civil service as it were. Now, if you look at the staff of the Regulatory Commission, many of them are on deputation from the utilities and they're going back to their utilities. So do you think you're going to make decisions that are going to harm your company? So even there is a problem because the pay structure is aligned to government. If you want professionals to come in as consultants, there might be an issue of pay and so on. And then you have people coming in from the utilities. So, in fact, I remember one of the first regulatory order in APERC was an order that banned captive generation. They said no captive generation unless you are a company that requires continuous process industry or so on and so forth. And instead of going into it, if I were a regulator, I would ensure that my HT tariffs were set at a rate where HT consumers didn't want to go out of the grid and generate their own electricity. Instead of that, you bring in a bureaucratic decision. So anyway, so some of these decisions you can see where they're coming from. And we do have a process of challenge. Who regulates these regulators? Decisions are challenged. Earlier on, it used to be at the High Court. Is it too much time? Okay. They used to be challenged at the High Court of the particular state. We found that High Courts, they're good at law, but they don't know electricity. So some of the decisions were really bizarre. And so now we have an appellate tribunal. So decisions go to the appellate tribunal. And then you can appeal at the Supreme Court as well. So it's not, the regulatory decision is final, but then they can be appealed. So, and the appeal process is now much more systematic. So, in that sense,
Time-bound appeal.
pardon? Yeah, the regulatory decision is time-bound. Appeal is not really time-bound, but then the way the appellate tribunal is functioning, the decisions are coming as quickly as one can expect it to come. And the decisions are on the website. You don't need to have a membership to look at those decisions. And they provide a lot of learning from the regulatory perspective.
How big is the regulation?
Most of the central regulator is a 5-member commission. 4 of them are regularly appointed regulators. The 5th is an ex officio member who is the head of what we call the Central Electricity Authority. That was done because CEA thought they should be the regulator, and nobody else thought that they should be the regulator. So to appease them, they put in the chairman of the CEA as an ex officio member. But at the state level, most of them are 3 members: a chairman and a technical member and a finance member. There are states, smaller states, with a single-member commission. That's also possible. Sikkim has 1 member, and so on. And there are some, I think Meghalaya and Manipur have a joint commission. 6 months this is a chairman, another 6 months another person is the chairman. And then we have what we call a JERC, which actually regulates, and this is, it's really tough. They regulate all the union territories and the smaller states like Puducherry, Andaman, Nicobar, Daman, Diu, and so on. So their area is really spread out. But they're small. The staff is, it varies from state to state. Some regulatory commissions are highly dependent on consultants. But I tell them, look, I'm a consultant. But I tell them, look, a consultant will give you what they think is right, but at the end of it, it's your signature on that paper. And you need people in your commission who can actually question the consultants and not take everything they tell you at face value, Ultimately, the decision is there. So, but a lot of commissions do have staff, but they're very poorly staffed. They're not adequately staffed. And this is one of the constraints that they have.
So they have constraints in terms of the finances?
No, not in terms of finances. Earlier on, they were supported by the Consolidated Fund of India. Now, a lot of, they get resources from the petition fees they get. They get petition fees, they get license fees. In fact, this is one commission which gives the licensing. It has a licensing authority. Earlier on, the government said, this is our sovereign right to license. Obviously, there's a lot of what we call, euphemistically called rent-seeking in economics, which is nothing but corruption. So there's a lot of rent-seeking in licensing. But we said, look, if you are a dominant player, and if you are also the licensing authority, it's like you have the power to license your competitor, which doesn't make sense. So it's the regulatory commission who must license. Now in telecom, that's not the case. The licensing power is still with the government. And telecom decisions are not final decisions. They're only recommendatory to the government. But in electricity, electricity regulators' decisions are not recommendatory. They're final decisions. They may sort of discuss with government. We don't know. It's not part of the process. But decisions are final. They're not recommendatory in nature. Yes.
Currently, the role for civil society is only when the regulatory commission gives them out, right? Is that what it is? Or
no, well, yes and no. In the sense that there is a lot of advocacy work that needs to be done in terms of telling people about the process, how they can actually get involved. So, say for example, NGO like Prayas would do it on its own. That advocacy role is an ongoing process.
I meant
within the regulatory commission, yes. When they call off for public hearings, it's important to be geared up to participate in those public hearings. And it's not, sometimes what happens is some people come and say, we don't want rates to go up. Oh, nobody wants rates to go up. But at the end of the day, if they do, there's something called inflation. It's part of the economic problems of, the way the economy is going. But you need to go behind those numbers. And you need to be able to make well-informed interventions which are important. I mean, you can rant and rave, but regulator will listen to you, but at the end of it, nothing much will come out of it. But if you actually study the sector and you are able to intervene very effectively, and it has happened in quite a few states. In Gujarat it has happened. And so this is one way. And sort of to tie up some of the loose ends, as it were, of the talk, I also wanted to say a few words about the governance of the sector itself. The understanding was that these companies would be government companies. I mean, nobody sort of said you must privatize. That is not at the top of anybody's mind, except that yes, maybe as government companies you would be professionalizing the way these organizations are run. But unfortunately, even today, there is a huge problem of what I call measurement problem. 50% of what you are supplying, you don't meter. You don't meter at all. There is no interest in metering. There's no interest in seeing where that electricity is going. So what we call euphemistically as distribution losses, which are partly technical and partly commercial. And commercial are partly because of slow meters and technical things and poor management, and partly because of pure theft. There is no handle on it. There's still a guesstimate, which is very unfortunate. 20 years, 30 years we've been talking about it, and we don't seem to be making much headway there at all. And it's purely a problem of poor management, which is on account of poor government. Secondly, who do you think in many of the states, I can't make a general thing, who do you think is the biggest defaulter for electricity? Huh?
State itself?
Yeah, the government. In fact, when we first looked into the way it was working, government schools don't even have a budget to pay for their electricity bills. Hospitals, police stations, government offices. Then when you, in fact, quite some time back, the Hyderabad Municipal Corporation did not pay their electricity bill at all. And I remember one day when they just cut off supply, and there was the traffic light stopped on this Kukatpalli Dilsuknagar road. You can imagine what kind of a chaos it was. And then they quickly, CMD quickly rang up, the commissioner rang up and said, look, we are making the payment. So there is a culture of non-payment in the sector. And this culture is not only with big organizations and even large private companies as well. The culture of non-payment in the villages is also very striking. Because when we've worked in the villages, we've worked at distribution, trying to see exactly what is the problem. Why is it that nobody seems to have a handle on this? And you find there's several reasons. You find people pay for their cable television. They pay for their mobile, but they will not pay 30 rupees or 50 rupees for electricity. Number one. Number two, there is a problem in the billing itself. The billing is not done properly. There is a lot of the idea that whatever corporatization and so on that we brought in, the idea that there is a contract between the utility and the customer, and there is a contract of 24/7 supply. There is a contract of informing the customer of various things. That still hasn't come in. And when people say, oh, urban is different. You can, when you say Bombay, the losses are so minimal, and you have continuous. Nobody uses an inverter or voltage stabilizer in most of Bombay. You say, look, it's private though. There is a private undertaking. There's also a municipal undertaking in Bombay, which is working very efficiently. It's a combined electricity and transport. When they had the tram, they started off with tram and electricity together in one corporation, municipal undertaking. And over time, of course, the trams have gone, but then they run buses instead of tram. But the corporation continues to be in charge of both bus services in BESTs. And they do a wonderful job of it. So when people say, oh, when you look at the rural areas, it's very different. And I said, okay, why don't you compare Delhi and Bombay? Delhi before privatization, quote unquote, because even after privatization, it's actually a joint venture. The government has 49% equity in these companies. We call it privatization, but it's a joint venture company. Prior to that, Delhi had losses of, nobody knew, 45%, 50%. So even if you compare like to like, maybe it's a cultural difference, in the two places. There are a lot of other influences that come in. So there are issues here.
So is it because of private entity being there in Bombay, the municipal?
Yeah, right from the beginning, the idea is, okay, you don't pay, you get warned. You get warned, and then you get disconnected. So there is that billing cycle is so much more systematized.
So it's not because of competition or something that is...
Right now, no. There is some competition in Bombay. It's too complex to talk about it right now. I don't want to do that. But we don't have, in the distribution end, we really don't have competition. They're all local area monopolies, which are regulated by the regulatory commissions for their tariffs and so on and so forth. Now there is some competition that is being brought in. We still don't know how it's going to. We are saying that large consumers can buy from anywhere, but there are a lot of technical and other issues that need to be dealt with before we can do it. The legal foundation is there, but what is actually happening is a different story. So, competition in energy is a different, huge thing altogether. So I've talked about electricity to a great extent, but electricity is not on its own. You have coal, you have natural gas, you have petroleum. And what kind of structures do we have here? If you look at natural gas and petroleum, we have a quote-unquote independent regulator for the downstream part of it. The government continues to be the regulator in the upstream. So your KG Basin is actually government regulator, not the Independent Petroleum and Natural Gas Board. Does not get into exploration and excavation, evacuation of gas and petroleum. They are not there.
When you say downstream, what is it?
Downstream is your petroleum products, pipelines and so on. Pricing is also something they ought to do, but they have not been notified to do it. So that regulatory framework there is in a very nascent stage. It is also not, they have not been given the powers that they need to do anything about it. And we have very little gas distribution network, city gas, very limited. We don't even have the gas to do it. So it's almost like a regulatory commission that is stifled at birth. Okay. Now, coal regulator, there's a lot of discussion now, especially in the context of the kind of scams that we've seen in coal. Natural gas pricing itself is a very is something, we are talking about scams, we're talking about auction and whether we need allocation, auction of coal blocks and so on. But natural gas pricing, natural resource pricing, okay. Yeah, it's all right, it's no problem. It's a very important subject that needs a lot more attention. Now, per se, I don't think allocation versus auction is it's a very important debate or significant debate, because in India, in the coal sector, we have a monopoly, Coal India Limited, which is 94% of the market share is Coal India. Most of the coal that is mined is what we call non-coking coal, and most of it comes to the power sector, where it is a pass-through in tariffs. So if you're going to auction it and then you give it to highest bidder, the prices go up there for a natural resource. Those high prices just sail in through the tariff to you and me. So perhaps auctioning, you need to decide, it need not be a price auction, you need to spend a lot more mind there. There was a proposal to have a coal regulator. If we do, suddenly a regulator becomes a buzzword. And if we do have a coal regulator, it will be the first in the world. Because coal is essentially a tradable commodity. You can buy it, sell it, import it, export it. It's what we call a tradable commodity. So any regulation of tradable commodity would come under the ambit of the other government agencies that we have, that look at markets, like the Competition Commission, like your Labour Act, like your safety. You know, there are a whole lot of framework for that. So it should come under that. Do we need a separate coal regulator? That is something that is still being discussed. There is interest in having it, but what, you know, are you looking at prices? Are you looking at mine safety? Are you looking at other huge problems that we have in the mining sector? We don't know. But because of this pass-through in coal prices and tariffs in electricity, they're thinking about it. There's also a thought that perhaps we must have an energy regulator. In fact, India is the only country in the world that has a Ministry of Power and a Ministry of Renewable Energy. You know, because of our coalition politics, we have number of ministries. So we have a Ministry of Coal, we have a Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, a Ministry of Power, Ministry of Renewable, and it's now called New and Renewable Resources. So we have a few, many arms of the government. So, and they all work in silos. In 1974, we had what we called the Fuel Policy Committee that actually looked at fuel for the entire country. Fuel being a little, you know, like energy. After that, it was only in the year 2006 that we came out with integrated energy policy. So we don't have an integrated approach to energy in this country. So not only do we have, and after 2006, so much has changed in terms of availability of energy sources, in terms of our ability to look at energy security issues, in terms of our commitments on the environment front. So you need to look at energy in an integrated manner. And we still don't have an update of that 2006 report, which actually used data from a year or two back. So essentially, it's almost 8-9 years since we've looked at energy in an integrated fashion on the policy front. And my own fear is that, okay, our ministries are working in silos, and over time, if we have as many regulatory commissions as you have ministries, then they would also be working in silos. So to what avail? A country like ours does need an integrated approach to energy, which is completely missing. We do not have integrated resource planning. We do not, we made an attempt, 2006, a report did come out. It's important because it did show some path that the country would be taking, but it's very important to keep updating the debate and using the newer data that comes in, and also looking at what did you estimate and what were the actuals, and why, you know, doing a post-mortem on that. We are not doing it. Planning Commission doesn't do it, and it is not in the ambit of any of the ministries to do it. So who will do this is a huge question. So we currently we have distribution companies that have enormous losses. The accumulated losses of the electricity distribution companies in the country at the last count was a staggering 180,000 crores. And why did this happen, even though we've had regulatory commissions in place for a long time? There is a provision that you must suo motu revise tariffs. Nobody did it. There were states where tariffs were not revised for 8-9 years, and they have receivables on their books amounting to 18,000 crores. So this is a mess that we are currently with. And what kind of solutions are we thinking of? One, of course, you need to clean up these balance sheets. But we had a one-time settlement 10 years back, and are we going to have another one-time settlement? And repeated one-time settlement. That will not, you know, that will just, it's like your defaulters, no? Every time you, a lot of people, what was it called, regularization of things, defaulter. So if everyone anticipates that there will be a time when it is going to be regularized and our deviations are going to be taken care of, that discipline will simply not come in. There is a thought that yes, the state government owns these companies. Part of the problem is with the state governments for not having allowed these regulators to work. Well, as far as I'm concerned, what is the question of allowing them to work or not? They are there, they cannot be impeached. So they should have stood their ground. I mean, there's no question, and they're not going to get any job afterwards. I mean, they've retired already. So they should have stood their grounds, which they didn't do. So your selection process has been poor. So this is one thing that's being tackled about. The other thing is a very bureaucratic approach to the whole thing. Regulators are expected to give compliance reports to the central regulator, and amendment to the act looking at the performance, which are going to analyze the performance of the regulatory commissions in order to ensure that they work properly is something that is being discussed. But at the end of it, I still think that if stakeholders, the other stakeholders, took a much more active interest in the process, it will not come to this situation that you will be able to default to this extent, you will be able to be completely non-performing for so many years, and then suddenly you need a bailout, a periodic bailout, a situation of that. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in this area. And I'll stop now. I mean, I could go on for a very long time, and this is my topic, but I think you've heard me a long time, and I'll stop now, but I'll respond to questions so that if there are questions, people. See, one more thing I just want to talk about is this whole rural electrification. Grid, non-grid is an issue. We have a case of Gujarat with its own government's money. They were able to provide 24/7 electricity to all the domestic rural areas. And agriculture will get 8 hours or 7 hours of supply or whatever. And that has had results in terms of this whole urbanization. If you have decent infrastructure in rural areas, you will actually, and create entrepreneurship in rural areas, create education, create healthcare in rural areas, we won't find the kind of monstrosities that we are having in the name of cities. And it's only with energy you can do that. Without electricity, your computer doesn't run, your phones don't run, a lot of things get affected. You don't have lights for your children to read. You don't have electricity to do even the minimum of operations, or the fridges where you keep your vaccines don't work. So this is extremely important. Gujarat was able to do it, and it was just, they said we have to do it, we will do it, and they did it. And that has been something rural areas really require. And there are a lot of questions being asked. I mean, why should the rural person pay the same as we do? We get more power supply than they do. Quality is better. And there's also this whole question of subsidy to agriculture. After all, food security is also very important for us. And farmers say that, look, we don't want electricity, we want water. And if the irrigation fellow is getting water for almost free, why are you penalizing us because we happen to farm in an arid area? And that has had its repercussion on, and your pricing policy for agriculture, where you have a minimum support price only for wheat and rice. Everybody wants to grow rice. It's more socially acceptable to grow rice. Your daughters get married if you grow rice. You're getting into that kind of a situation. And to grow rice, you need water. So you're digging more and more bore wells, and it has a problem. So there's a lot of across the economy integration that has its, somewhere it has an electricity policy, and electricity decision making has an energy decision making. I mean, I won't go into transportation and so on and so forth, but it's there, and one needs to recognize these kind of linkages across the economy. And
talking a little bit more about Gujarat.
Yeah.
Have there been more generation of power? Have there been?
Yeah, I'll give you one. It's a very interesting story. I'm glad you asked it. Now, in the year, we all knew that we were going to be short of fuel. Coal, surprisingly, Coal India mines the target that has been set for it by the Planning Commission. They said, look, this is our target, we've mined it. We've even mined more than our target. So why are you saying there's no coal? Obviously, there is a flip between actual requirements and the target given to Coal India, which is anyway a monopolistic. It's 94%. So we knew that, and there was a lot of debate on whether we should go into natural gas. And we know that we don't have enough natural gas. We need to import natural gas, CNG and so on. Then what happened was LNG, sorry, not CNG, LNG. Now in Andhra Pradesh, and this is a contrast in policy making and decision making. In Andhra Pradesh, in the year 2000, 2001, I think, around that time, 2001, around that time, we had a expert committee set up to look at whether we should build a LNG station with its port at Kakinada. There was a proposal. Chandrababu Naidu was very keen on that. We had lots of meetings. I also went to the meeting. We had lots of modeling. We had supply side models, demand side models. And we looked at the supply side. We also said there is an environmental benefit out of having gas-based plants as against coal-based plants. So we did that as well. We said where would the plants that were fueled by the CNG that we would import be. And then, and that came around, all has to do with variations in prices, and there's a lot of uncertainties. You need to make these assumptions and so on. We did all that. And the CNG fueled gas-based power plant was coming about 7th in the ranking. So we said it's too far down, we don't need it. And the price that was being talked about was $4 per MMBTU. Okay, with an escalation connected to crude oil rates. And the current going rate, and we didn't have private companies, we didn't even have, well, the administered price for gas at that point of time was about 2.74, I think, dollars per MMBTU. So we were looking at 4 vis-a-vis 2.74, and we said no, this is not going to work out. It will be too expensive. Our models do not support it. Nothing supports it. So that project was scrapped. It didn't come up. In Gujarat, they said we are a resource poor state. Lot of entrepreneurs, but no resources. They were importing coal from hundreds of kilometers from the central coal fields. They had some gas, but not enough. So they said, at the end of the day, if we want our economy to grow the way we want it to grow, we need energy. And we are not going to get it from within the country. So they just made a decision, we want to have an LNG terminal, we'll have an LNG terminal. They went ahead and added. The idea for them was, power, costly power is cheaper than no power. Okay? They just went ahead and did it. And today, and then there are different, I mean, I don't want to go into the details. If you are using costly fuel, but you are, your output, your products are being sold in a competitive market, then you make your decision on what fuel you can buy and what fuel you can't buy. But if you're using costly fuel in a regulated utility where your customers, like electricity companies, your customers are captive, I can only buy from CPDCL, I can't buy from anybody else. Then a regulator makes a decision on whether how much of that fuel I can pass on. So they did have certain interventions in place to see that the utilities would look, these companies would look at long-term purchases which are cheaper, cut down on their spot purchases which are more expensive, a lot of interventions there. But at the end of the day, look at the two states. Gujarat is surplus import. They are actually looking for markets where they can export power. And perhaps the only reason they are not able to export it to the southern region is because we do not have adequate transmission capacity. Andhra Pradesh has almost 1800 megawatts of gas-based capacity that is stranded because we don't have fuel. The power plants have come up, there is no gas to run it. So we have dead investment. Unless there is gas, we don't run it. So just, and the decision here was made on a lot of analysis and a lot of modeling and so on and so forth, which went completely topsy-turvy. The decision there was literally made on a gut feeling, you know. We need it. The CM said we need it. The Chief Secretary said yes, we need it. And they just went ahead and built that CNG station. So somewhere you need to, suppose for some reason, you know, you can always imagine a situation where we had lots of gas and there was gas finding, domestic gas finding, and gas prices had really plummeted and they're very reasonable now, then perhaps Gujarat would have been under fire. You know, why did you make a decision that was so expensive? But this is the way it worked out, and now we are looking at a situation where people are actually looking at $14 per MMBTU. That is what the demand is from the KG-based gas station. Where was that $4 that we rejected? And where is $14 today? I mean, yes.
That's a little bit unfair, isn't it? Because KG Basin hasn't gone.
Pardon?
KG Basin hasn't delivered the kind of
Yeah.
it was supposed to.
Yeah.
If it had, you wouldn't have had a shortfall here.
Yeah.
And secondly, if today shale gas actually takes off,
Yeah.
then you'll again come back to $2.
Yeah, quite fine. You see, there is a lot of volatility in these pricings. You make decisions, very informed decisions by people who know the sector very well, and then we don't know. And in KG Basin, I really, I mean, I'm not an expert there in that area, not to use the word expert, but then basically it's a production sharing contract. The pricing factor was never part of that contract. So people just assumed a price that the company would dictate. And the government has also kept very quiet there, because government is also a beneficiary of whatever price that is going to be set. That is the one thing that is going on, and you cannot set a price until you see, exploration has one set of problems. You know, you have the well digging problem. You could dig 10 wells, and if all 10 are dry, then you are in the red. But if the last well also gives you oil, then you are, you know, you're in the stratosphere. So there are, these issues are there of exploration and so on. But at the same time, how did the assumption of how much gas there was be so different?
Well, you don't know if it is, because you know,
we don't. Yeah, that's right.
On the one hand, the fact
but
that
at the same time, I would submit that yes, it is a public-private partnership. ONGC is as much a public partner in this production sharing contract. It is between the government. They share the produce. So both of them have a responsibility.
the profit gas is very small actually. If you see, even if you take the price up 2.5 times, the government gets hardly $1 extra. Most of it goes to the
that's what I'm saying.
That's a poorly negotiated
negotiated, very poorly.
What is your view on solar?
Solar, I mean, prices are going down. We do have a policy in place that will help. But I'm not very sure about solar that will be land intense. I'm not very, there are issues with grid connectivity of solar. And currently, given the fact that our capacity consumption of energy in the country is so low compared to any other country, I mean many other countries, there is a need to sort of improve that on the one hand, and then you have, it will not replace fossil fuel in the near future. It will supplement fossil fuel.
Just to add,
for a very long time.
Last time, Mr. Kumar said, he spoke about overall energy, and he mentioned about the return that you get per unit invested, unit of electricity that you have to invest to get a unit of how many units of electricity you get out of it. So,
the efficiency factor.
Efficiency factor in that sense, because solar requires manufacturing of those panels, and which is an energy intensive process apparently.
And then the water also too.
There apparently he gave some numbers in which solar came a little low. It was about 1.6 or something.
1.5.
Yeah.
1.5.
But so for today's standards, it may look low. But what he felt was that going forward, because the natural resources will go on reducing, depleting, and we have to dig deeper to get those natural resources out.
It will be more expensive.
Yes. So overall, you may be in the probably 10 years or 5-10 years down the line, you may be in that range, which
In the last 4 years, prices of solar have crashed.
the prices have crashed. I agree.
The
Just
capital
put in
cost.
investment, the cost will come down even to half. Today it is only twice more expensive to set up in terms of capacity than thermal, and it is 1/3 the price of nuclear.
I agree with you. No, I'm not talking about the price at all.
But you do have issues with.
Which says keeps on going on.
No.
Nuclear.
Solar.
Whereas you have 100 years of problems in terms of storing nuclear, which is not cost saving.
Correct.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Yeah.
Absolutely no
But when you come to solar,
No, I'm not
again, I would be very happy with off-grid solutions which are required. I would be very happy with using more solar in our homes. Perhaps panels on the top. Mandatory water heating should be through solar, and so on and so forth. And you have solar lighting systems and so on. These have come out very well. LEDs. We also have initiatives where we are looking at street lighting through solar. So a lot of work can be, solar needs to be much more a part of our, what we call traditional fuel rather than something that is different. But in terms of supplementing, in terms of bringing in the capacities that are required, I'm not sure.
So last time we shared after the national mission, now state mission has come out there. Solar mission.
Solar policy has come out.
The policies, they are hardly consistent with promoting solar. First of all, subsidies were for some time taken off and now they are back in. Secondly, you have
subsidy is a function of how wealthy the government thinks it is. There's nothing to do with promoting the sector at that point of time.
The amount is small, right? We're talking about less than 2,000 crores. It's peanut size today. If you were actually serious about it, you could have raised it up a couple of times without making a difference in the financial. Today we are talking about 4 crore transfers, 4 lakh crore transfers to different parts of the population. But coming back to this distribution, why do we have such high wheeling charges? And why is the regulatory commission not trying to push that? If you generate your own power, your wheeling charges will kill you.
No, more than wheeling charges, it's what we call the cross-subsidy charges, which is a problem. But more than, both these can be managed in the sense that there are states which have brought them down substantially. There are states where both the cross-subsidy surcharge, in fact in Maharashtra for a long time it was 0. So that can be done through intervention, the kind of intervention that we're talking about. Make your arguments, get the point through. But at the end of the day, there is a lot of opaqueness regarding transmission capabilities and how much transmission is available for short-term users. All our transmission is planned for long-term users, which is our 20 years users. So whatever is available at any point of time is available for short-term users, who are the people who require this wheeling and so on. And they get bumped off first. If there is a constraint or if there is perceived to be a constraint on any transmission corridor, you just get bumped off. So there's a huge uncertainty regarding whether when you use open access you will actually get dispatched or not, which is making the entire sector very, which is why this open access has not taken off. Power exchange, through the power exchange the trading is only 2%. In fact, 89% of the entire electricity is through long-term PPAs. So I'm not so worried about the wheeling, because even if there are wheeling charges, cross-subsidy charges that are detrimental, these are charges that are within the ambit of the Regulatory Commission to decide. And you can actually put in motion a process where you can strike at those decisions, bring in examples from elsewhere. But the structural problems of load dispatch centers, of transmission capacity that don't look at short-term requirements at all, those are the things that need to be addressed, and they're not being addressed.
The APDRP, how far has that been successful in reducing T&D and so on?
I don't know. I don't have the figures for that. There's been a lot of investments. The RAPDRP is going on, everyone's talking about computerization, but at the end of the day, I still have a very simple problem. You can put in any amount of investments, you can put in all your technical upgrades that you want. But if the people don't want to measure, and the people don't want to use the data that they have, all that investment is not going to make any sense. Those systems need to be in place, and they're not in place. What's the point? If you put in meters everywhere, you're collect. In fact, one point of time, I remember we wanted data about what were the actual losses in a particular, in a particular district. And they just sent us a pile of paper with all the numbers in it. It doesn't make sense to me at all. You need a system in place where you're trying to analyze all the time. Real-time data needs to be analyzed. It's not rocket science, but they're not doing it. Any more questions about it?
When we talk about losses of these petroleum companies,
under recovery.
Yeah. I heard on some news debate Sitaram Yechuri saying that these are notional under recoveries, they are not actual under recoveries.
You see, there's a whole debate on how do you price energy. Now, there's a lot of when you look at notional, it's like I'm using the gas or I'm using the petroleum, crude oil in my country, but the notional price I have is the import parity price. So if I'm looking at import parity price that I think I could get, vis-a-vis the price that is cost-based, you get two different prices.
So that way the losses under recoveries are not that big as they...
You see, that's why, you see, on one hand there are under recoveries, on the other hand you have ONGC sitting on a pile of cash. ONGC, of course, is an exploration company, and all these under recoveries are being passed on to the petroleum, the downstream companies. There is a huge mess up there. I'm not, I'm not terribly.
How you define under
recovery. That's the thing.
Last year, if you take the numbers, take all the under recoveries to the account of the government. The government made 1,64,000 crores as taxes from the sector.
Yeah, so the
If you put all the money back in so-called under recovery.
Correct.
So net return to the government was 1,60,000. With the taxes, it was more than 4 lakh.
Yeah, taxes are huge.
If you take away the taxes, it's still 1 lakh.
No.
Take away, assume subsidies go to zero and are funded by the central government.
Okay.
After that, all the governments put
You
together
still have
made
that with the tax.
1,64,000 crores. There are no under recoveries. It's a question of
it's
whether you put it in petroleum ministry or you put it in
it's like what are you comparing to what?
If you include tax, I think you are...
Not only include tax, what price are you using?
Also what that?
What is the domestic price?
Today, petroleum products are the highest tax in this country.
Yes.
Aside from cigarettes or drinks for that matter, right? If you take it at a normal rate of tax, right, there will be no under recovery. In fact, there will be a surplus. More importantly, under the new system that is supposed to be proposed, where you have no taxes on, where you have a Selvat kind of situation, where you have a VAT. Just guess what? Oil and gas is not Selvatable. It will not come under VAT. You will not get an offset on it. It's totally illogical.
And I really don't. I have serious problems with looking at natural resource pricing on import parity basis. We are, it's our domestic resources. As long as
we are exporting, why should we
are importing crude oil. We have the highest refinery capacity in the world. I mean, the biggest refinery is in India. But that's a different issue.
The mainstream narrative itself is completely wrong.
And at the same time, look, if we are looking at import parity prices for fuel, then look at import parity prices for all our services. I don't get paid as much as a professor in US or Europe gets paid. So why, and we are looking at domestic. I'm not saying I'll still pay whatever, $10, $20 for a Arrow shirt that I pay here, pay there, whatever. That's a different issue. I don't require an Arrow shirt. But if you're looking at domestically available resources, why should it be on import parity at all?
In fact, it works, right? Because let's say today Reliance is surplus refinery, right? It exports the last part of its product. What is the alternative? When it sells to an Indian refiner, it gets for distribution because they don't have their own distribution. They get import parity prices. However, most of the product is exported, where they are getting export parity prices. So basically, you are subsidizing them by putting in the additional tax, the difference between the import and the local price.
I don't think I followed.
The export parity price.
I'm saying that you are take the case of Reliance, right? We are selling some things to HPCL, IOC and so on, which are then sold to us through the petrol pumps. HPCL could theoretically buy from overseas, right?
It's the same product.
And then when you are buying, you will be paying the custom tariff, which will get built into the price, right? So therefore, when they are buying from Reliance, they are buying at the same price as if they were importing. Now, look at it from the Reliance point of view. What was the alternative if IOC did not pick it up? They would have to export. And the export would be at international prices without the custom tariff. Right? So you are actually giving them the benefit of the custom tariff for doing nothing.
Of course, they're doing a lot of import. They import the crude oil, they process it, refine it.
So for that, you're getting anyway the refining price. See, that's an international price. You know, in oil and gas, you have a refinery crack price, and you have a crude. So you add the two, that is what you get your final refined product of. So that's an international price. There's no problem there. Right? But by giving them import parity prices, you are actually giving them the benefit of custom. So we are not being subsidized for it. Simple problem. Look at, you get $1 a barrel, $1 a gallon at the petrol pump in the US. You are paying $1 a liter in India, or $1.5.
$1.5.
But most of it is tax.
Yeah.
Of course, most of it is tax. So where is the subsidy? Is my question.
So this deregulation of petroleum products prices.
It's not happened yet. We have a regulatory
board. The
board.
taxes should not be there.
So
You cannot.
Such a large part of the revenue of the government.
They do.
Cannot afford to give it.
It's like your liquor tax.
It's not like that.
Sin tax. Yeah.
Do you have any idea of solar power prices?
Solar?
No.
I can tell you it costs about 8 crores for 1 megawatt plant, and I think in the recent solar mission, the bids are all, the lowest bid was about 8 to 9 rupees.
8 plus.
8 to 9 rupees per.
But there are some states which have said 12 rupees. Some have asked 14 rupees.
AP's price is 14 rupees.
We don't have any. We won't give any input fee. We only just control.
It takes the input, initial cost, and then your loan, water interest and all that. Yeah, mainly that.
It's a capital cost and a little bit of O&M. There's no fuel price, that's all. Fuel price.
But anyway, December 9th we have a talk on solar. He's Dr. Venkataraman. He runs a company called Solar, so I think he will be able to give more detailed answers on it.
Yes.
When it comes to the reforms that Chandrababu Naidu did, so what exactly did he do and what was its impact? Structural reforms that we put in electricity.
Well, it was part of what was happening in the rest of the country. The idea was these companies, the State Electricity Board, at that point of time, if you think it's the largest next to the government, state government network. These were huge, right, in terms of people, in terms of the reach that it had and so on. So the idea was, yes, you can, it was no longer required to have generation, transmission, distribution in the same company, board. And they could, you already had NTPC and others, central sector companies as generating company, and AP Genco would become one company. Transmission would be another company, looking at transmission. And distribution, because the state is so large, you would have 4 different distribution sectors. Now, in the SEB days, a lot of emphasis, as I started off with, was on generation part of it. And distribution really did not get the kind of attention that it required. So the idea was you have 4 different distribution companies. Why 4, not 5, not 6 is a different question. It's a decision that's taken on what is appropriate. So the idea was, yes, these companies would only be looking at distribution. They wouldn't be looking at anything else. They would not be worried about coal, would not be worried about generation. transmission would be only transmission and then distribution. Now initially there was only a functional separation of this, but they're all government companies, continue to be all 100% government owned, so in that sense there's nothing else. And unfortunately what's happened in Andhra Pradesh, the idea was that AP Genco would be like a generating company like NTPC, and a post-electricity act, transmission and trading was separated. Transmission would be like power grid, only a transmission wires company. They just build the transmission network and maintain it. And then the distribution companies would only look at distribution. Now, unfortunately, what's happened in AP and in many of the other states as well, is that you are only simulating the structures of the past, even though you have functionally unbundled. So in AP today, the distribution companies don't work like companies. They don't even have a proper board structure. Any decision they have to be made is made in the secretariat. It's not, they don't really operate in a professional company manner. They're either looking at the demand of their customers, looking at the needs of their customers. That kind of customer orientation has not come in to the extent that it should have. So those structures are not there. They should also be making independent decisions regarding buying power, because they don't generate, no? They buy. And they can buy from Genco, they can source it from different ways. But again, that is not happening because they have an informal committee, which is it's not a statutory committee, informal committee with Transco as the head, and the 4 distribution companies part of it, and they make the power purchase decisions. So again, those decision making is simulating things of the past. And thirdly, again, if they need to make power purchases, they go to the government for permission, which is again, will the government support? If you support, we will buy. If you don't support, we won't buy. So in AP, very unfortunately, into 2009, which was an election year, almost 6,500 crores was spent on short-term power purchase, which was supported by the government, which none of us saw in our electricity bills, because we wanted the electricity to be position to be fine at that point of time. Soon after, there were problems, and then when they went to the government and said, we need to buy electricity. If you want electricity, say 2 months, 3 months ahead of time, you need to start sourcing, you need to start the whole activity. And when they went to the government said no money. So they didn't do anything about it until there was an agriculture shortage of electricity, and they had to source at short term, and all kinds of things happened. So the idea was the generating companies, in fact AP Genco in the future can become like a big generator, but it's not happening. Even their rates are not open yet. Many of the other state generating tariffs are part of the regulatory process. In Andhra Pradesh generation, AP Genco does not give plant-wise data of its tariffs. It's not happened. In fact, there's been a kind of a limbo in AP as far as this whole regulatory thing is. So unfortunately, what should have happened is not what has happened. The idea behind it and what actually happened. Anything else, or shall we? Yes, please.
Suppose now we have replaced power projects based on diesel or petrol. Price are there. Now suppose diesel or petrol is not available. So whatever the investment that we have done is waste. It's a waste. So how decisions are made related to this? We are thinking that fuel is available and we are...
That is where, you see, that's where your integrated energy policy becomes very important. We do something called integrated resource planning, and you need to project availability and also price. Of course, liquid fuel and gas are, if you have a combined cycle station, you can run it on liquid fuel and gas, you can do that. But again, the prices will vary a lot. And at the end of the day, you might have a situation where if it's too expensive, people would rather not buy than buy at that rate. And it's not just, we've had these problems. We are having it here in AP. We've had it in NTPC's own plant in Kerala, where they set up a plant, gas-based plant, no gas, If you run it on naphtha, it's too expensive, nobody wants to buy it. But then you do have a contract where a certain amount of the fixed cost of that plant is being borne by your the consumers who are paying for it. So yeah, it is tough. That's where fuel option is a very important. We go on coal because we know, okay, we have domestic coal, but how much it's going to be priced, how it's going to go, and even when we are talking about importing coal, it's not so easy because our boilers are really designed for our domestic coal. It's not as if we can tomorrow start importing coal and put the same coal in those boilers. So this coal blending, new plants can be designed such. Old plants is a different thing. So it's a tough planning. You need to be on top of things. You need to look at prices, volatility, technology. In fact, even the PPAs, look at it from the consumer's point of view. Suppose I have a 25-year PPA with you for a gas-based station, and tomorrow new power is available at much cheaper rates. I would like to get out of that contract with you. So the whole idea of, do you need 20-25-year PPAs? And in our country, we have the generators are very get a comfort from that. And this is where, when you want new consumers to source for their own power supply, if I set up a cement plant, I don't want to get into a 20-year contract. I don't even know if I'll be there 20 years afterwards. I have a long-term debt of 12 years. After 12 years, I'll take a call whether the cement industry, I can survive here or not. What will I do with a 25-year contract? This is where that kind of choice and flexibility are still not coming into the sector. Maybe in the future.
I'll just ask one last question.
Yeah, sure.
This was a question from last session.
Yeah.
Do you think that opening up energy sector and the private participation, how far has it helped so far in this 20-year period?
I can talk more for electricity.
Yes.
Okay. On the transmission side, which is the easiest, not much of an impact. You open up, yes, you have, because the operations of a transmission system is pretty centralized. So you set up a transmission line, and then you maintain it. There's nothing, the impact is not huge. It's part of a network planning system. On the generating side, we see that installed capacity by the private sector has increased. It used to be about 10 to 11% more than 10 years back. Now it's almost 30%. So huge capacities have come in. And
this could not have been possible without. I am asking.
Yes.
If private companies also invest probably 10 to 20% of the capital. And
yes,
rest of
they
it is
have.
Loan.
But then you do know about the problem right now that we are facing with UNPP, right? The ultra mega power projects, the Tatas at Mundra and then the Reliance. The idea was, initially we had smaller IPPs set up, the competitive bidding. There was a MOU. We said MOU can be negotiated, and we had a stage where the more you negotiated, the more the prices went up. So we said this is not working. Put in place a competitive bidding mechanism. Now we have these, and then the idea was, okay, let's have a few supercritical kind of, latest technology, huge plants, because we need that kind of a jump in installed capacity. So we had ultra mega power plants. Now Tata won the first. It was about 2 rupees something, no? 2 rupees. Do you remember the number?
34 odd.
Yeah, 30. And everyone said fine. And this was based on imported coal. They were importing from Indonesia. Fine. Then second was won by Lanco. 1 rupee 19 paise pithead station. It's so wonderful if they can do it at 1 rupee 19 paise. What are we doing with NTPC and so on and so forth? That's NTPC they did participate, but they never won any of these contracts. So the whole question was, is there too much padding in the NTPC rates? Because NTPC sets up power plants. They don't go through this competitive process. And there were a lot of issues in terms of how much depreciation they were charging, what kind of a return, and what kind of a padding there was in their some of their normative parameters and so on. So everyone said, oh, I see NTPC didn't win, and obviously, you know, we are getting very cheap power. But Lanco had to backtrack because of other issues, and Reliance was given the opportunity of matching L1, they matched it in the third contract was also won by Reliance, and they said, oh, too much of Reliance is happening. And when the fourth contract was won by, third was in Krishnapatnam, fourth in Tilaya, and that was also won by Reliance, a cabinet note was moved, saying that unless you finish one project, you cannot bid for another. And then the bubble burst, because what happened was all these projects they had taken over the fuel risk. See, all along we were looking at two-part tariffs. Fixed costs are, you know, calculated, you know it upfront how much is going to be the fixed cost. As you pay it off, your debt pays off, then it's only the equity payment and so on and so forth. But fuel prices would be a pass-through. So that is a pass-through. Whatever you're paying for fuel is a pass-through. So you don't make estimates about how much it's going to be. Now these companies it wasn't a single part bidding, but they said they would take the fuel risk. And that is how they were able to quote such low prices and win these contracts. Then the Indonesian government came out with a statement saying that any coal that is exported out of Indonesia has to be exported at an international price, and royalty will also be paid to us, to the government. So then these companies, there was a lot of problems, because suddenly they were in a situation where the fuel risks, which is always passed on to the consumers in the public sector, and here the private companies came in and said, we will absorb the fuel risks, and they couldn't do it anymore, because the prices went way out of what they had calculated. Then this whole thing unraveled. They went, met the PM, and the PM got in touch with CIL, and CIL, they said, you must have a fuel supply arrangement. We don't, no, we have, these fuel supply arrangements are also another story altogether. So in that sense, we thought, okay, prices are coming down, but now if you, now of course NTPC would say, see, we knew that there would be a problem with the fuel, and we factored in the fuel risk, and that's why we did not, we couldn't match their prices. They didn't factor in the fuel risk. And here you have a very difficult situation, because if the government says at this point of time, if the government says, yes, we will allow the fuel risk, maybe they will say, okay, we will not allow you to bear the entire fuel risk, but we will sort of share it out with consumers and so on. Again, you're going against your bidding parameters. But if they cancel the projects, and the private players pay up the penalty up front rather than bleeding for the next 20 years, they cancel the project, the country needs electricity, so they will have to bid those projects again, and the new bidders will obviously take into account the fuel risks. So where are you? It's like the devil in the deep sea. We need to see what decision the government will make. We don't know. So in that sense, at the generation level, capacity has been added. Much needed capacity. Perhaps the state government capacity addition has been not so huge. Central sector to some extent.
This could not have been done without the private players.
Right now they're 30%, so they are a huge player. And in the distribution end, we have very little private sector interest and private sector participation. Orissa, there was the first distribution segment where it was quote-unquote privatized, but for various reasons, it hasn't worked properly. We can't go into it. Delhi, to some extent, it has been costly, but at least on the performance, on the customer side, on access and so on, it's worked better. And then we have pockets of old private distribution companies, so we can't take that into account. Now the new thing is franchisees. There's a franchisee in Bhiwandi which has been taken over by Torrent. Results are good, but there are questions about whether this model is going to work elsewhere, what kind of involvement. The regulatory commissions don't recognize the franchisee. They only recognize the licensee. So if there's any problem with the franchisee, that it's the licensee that has to mediate or will be held accountable. So there are issues there. And now the Planning Commission, now the new buzzword is PPP. So the Planning Commission has come out with a paper that says, let's not look at privatization, let's not look at franchisees, let's look at PPPs. But to my mind, even a PPP is not recognized by the Regulatory Commission. And it's very much, it's structurally, your contractual systems might be different, but as far as the regulator is concerned, he'll look at the licensee. It's not going to make a difference. But by and large, most of the country is with the public sector, even today. But most of it is corporatized public sector. Very few pockets of government, department-owned distribution. Maybe in Pondicherry, Puducherry is one. We're really small. But most of the country is corporatized but government-owned. But you don't see the kind of changes that you wanted to see happening. Like I said, the board structure is not maintained. Many of them don't even have their annual reports are not done properly. It's still the same story. Whatever you try to do it with a certain purpose, structurally it looks different, but in spirit nothing has changed. So that's the problem that.
Will privatization bring any difference? And
you see, is the private sector interested?
No, then will regulator be more?
You see, they're interested in generation, because you generate and it's out of the bus bar and that's it. You have nothing to do. But in distribution, and especially when you're looking at distribution of urban areas, semi-urban areas, rural areas, I don't think the private sector wants to even, dirty their fingers. It's not just a technical solution you're looking at. You are looking at a solution where you need to work with people, you need to put in processes, you have a huge employee structure that needs, the culture of the organization needs to be changed, and then you have all these political dimensions, sociological dimensions that you need to take care of. So it's a huge task, and I don't see the private sector would be interested in, say, pockets of urban India perhaps, but I don't see them being interested in either a complete distribution company with both urban and rural, or rural.
But is there a model of that in any other countries?
What?
Like private distribution taking up, and countries similar to us, like a very rural.
It also depends on what you call private. For example, I was just telling somebody the other day, I firmly believe that anything in rural electrification better management will not be possible unless you involve local communities. So like Bangladesh has a model of what they call the Palli Vidyut committee. Of course, they're highly subsidized. I don't think we should get into a situation where you have highly subsidized sectors like that. But unless you involve the communities, the local panchayats, the local communities, it will not happen. There is no way in which any quote-unquote outsider will be able to take care of this. There was an attempt, we've been involved in one of the franchise, it's a kind loosely defined as a franchisee near Ibrahimpatnam, and we've seen the kind of processes. It's not rocket science. Basically, it's only when a transformer bursts or there's some, the line breaks down, you need somebody to come in and fix it. But just the simple thing of metering, billing, collection itself is daunting. And I don't see it happening without community participation there. In fact, they tried it in Orissa, but I don't know. I have not followed it up. I don't know where it went wrong. Obviously, it's gone wrong because you don't see the results on the ground. But where it went wrong and why it went wrong, I don't know. Now, there's another initiative that we have been involved with government of AP. This is a Pagadipalli village. Again, I need to sort of go back there and see what exactly has happened. The idea was up front you put in the street lights, which are solar LED street lights, and also give each hut or each house in the village one, I think they use CFL, they didn't use LED because those LED lights at that point of time were still expensive. So the idea was that the panchayat has to pay for the public lighting, right, which is the street lighting from its panchayat funds. And they would use that to pay the company that set up the public street lighting, and the payback would be over in about 3 years. And after that, so they have two benefits of that. One is when all the other villages are in the dark because there's no electricity, their lights burn because it's solar. And secondly, after a gap of about 2 or 3 years when the payback is done, then this payment to the distribution company is no longer required, at least on the street lighting front. So there are lots of these initiatives, but there's small initiatives and you need to be persistent at them. You need a lot more on the ground kind of involvement, and that can only happen with you need a lot of people, and local involvement. If the local person couldn't care less, there's nothing you can do. You're not going to go there and ensure that the LED lights are on. You're not going to go there. You just need to clean the panels once a month. You're not going to go there to check whether they're doing that or not. So that involvement needs to be there. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed it.
With me that we have had a really insightful talk. I must tell you that Dr. Usha Ramachandra garu, she has cancelled her personal appointment to be here with us today. Thank you so much, madam. We are grateful to you. As a gesture of our gratitude, we'll just give a small moment or so. Please, Suman.
Oh my God, this is
Why? No, this is just a... This is nothing fancy.
Just to inform everyone, we have the series continuing. We have 2 more talks. The next one is by Mr. Venkat Rajaraman, who is the CEO of